Welcome everybody as you're joining. This is exciting. It's exciting for me anyhow.
Oh, it's exciting for us too. So I'm just going to say, this is Marlena with Dexpro. We are the lucky people who are able to work with someone like Belinda Ellen, and she can teach all of us a lot about Power BI and many other things. So it's an honor to have a business relationship with someone like that. And I'm glad that between us, Dexpro and Belinda, we can, open that knowledge at no charge to people who are interested to learn more about Power BI. A little bit about Dexpro. We are silver partners serving clients nationwide. And again, we are able to work with Belinda Ellen as well as we do training with Amber Bell on functional GP every month, twice a month at no charge, and launching next month training classes that will require payment for our classes on year end is coming next month. And I'm gonna stop. And now it's all Belinda and Power BI. Thank you everyone for your time.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks a lot. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Haley and Marlene, if you guys would watch the chat. So if anybody has questions, they can just simply type them into the chat, and or if you want, you could come off mute and just simply ask it. But I feel free to ask a question as it comes up. This is one of my favorite topics, and so we're going to be going a little bit fast on this. I'll try not to go over too far because I could just spend tons of time on it. And this is all about cash, and it's really critical. I mean, well, it's critical all the time, but in this time of the pandemic, how do we manage cash, and what do we do as far as monitoring what's going on so that we can have the cash that we need to continue in operation is what we're here to talk about today. So as usual, special thanks to Marlena and Haley and the entire Dexpro team for giving me a platform in which to share information with my GP people. Haley, you might need to come off mute. I sent you an invite just today, and I don't know that you have it. I think this is the day that we're going to have the next one. We'll see if if my gracious hosts are free that day. Based off of last month's forum, or I don't know what you call it, the evaluation forum where you could tell me what you want to see. This is one of the topics that people were interested in was receivables. So I thought I'd go ahead and just end with receivables because it's very similar to what we did previously with AP. It works very similar, but there are also a couple additional things that we could add on top of it to help us with collection information. So I think this is the date. If stay tuned for the invitation for that. So our agenda today is we're going to look at our cash balance, and we're going to look at cash flow calendar and where the money goes. We're going to look a little bit about all kinds of cash information, and we're going to look at it from two particular sources inside of GP. One of them being the bank reconciliation module, the card itself, and the other one coming from the general ledger information. And I'd like to look at both of those together. But before we do that, I do want to do a little bit of introduction to cash flow because I think this is absolutely critical. And if you've been to some of my series, I normally call this Not Your Daddy's Cash Flow, which I think is hysterical. But some of these slides are from that. So when we're talking Business 101, cash flow and profit do not have anything to do with each other, right? So you could stay in business with cash flow even if you have a negative profit. And a lot of people don't, they may or may not realize that, but that's certainly the case. If you don't have the cash to pay your bills, even if you're profitable on paper, then you're not going to be able to stay in business. And I've heard a lot of people say profits are an opinion, cash is fact. So that's another way of saying that. And this is the traditional cash flow statement, and it is one crazy, junky scenario. And this kind of format was created before it was so easy to get in and do something with the data itself, do something with the individual, every line of data. So it is about as clear as mud. And it's funny because over the course of all of my implementations of ERP systems, when somebody would say, here's the financial statement, I would usually always come back with, why don't we compare it to last year? And why don't we do a pro forma budget? And why don't we do this? But when it came to cash flow statement, I always just said, tell me how you want it and I'm going to do it. Because personally, I found it incredibly difficult to read and interpret. I know there are a lot of people who can, but not always business owners either. So we're going to talk about what a cash flow statement is meant to reveal. First of all, we want to know where the cash is coming from. Is it coming from revenue? Is it coming from loans? Is it coming from stock sales? We want to know where the cash is spent. We also want to know what the cash balance is over a longer time period so we could see any kind of trend that could happen. Basically, we want to know, is your business thriving or do you have poor cash flow? So this is what the cash flow statements are meant to reveal, and this is what we're going to be building towards today. And this is of all of my slides, this is absolutely without a doubt one of my favorites. So I'm going to age myself here, but when I was in junior high, this is the shoe that everybody wanted and everybody had to be wearing. This particular style of Nike. And so if you're of a certain age, you'll remember the shoe and you'll remember, yes, indeed, it was popular. And if you ask me, because everybody I went to school in Georgia, everybody in Georgia had this shoe on from a company out in Portland, Oregon. If you'd asked me, I would have said, oh yeah, they have tons and tons of money. But a couple years ago, I read the book called Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, who is the founder of Nike. And it was interesting because during this same time period, they almost went out of business multiple times because they were struggling for cash. So that's just another great example of how profitability and even popularity and trending doesn't have anything to do with cash flow. Now, when it comes to GP, we have two different dates that we're going to be dealing with. One of them is the reporting date, and one of them is actually the entry date. And I like to look at both of those when I'm looking at the detail. For some things, I'll look at the reporting date, meaning the general ledger date, the posting date, the date that it appears on a financial statement. But for other reports, I like to look at the day it was entered in the system. Because if I'm looking at this report regularly, which everybody should be, if I'm looking at it maybe once a week, I want to know what's made a change to my cash account since the last time I looked at the report. And I don't care what date it hits the general ledger. When I'm focusing on cash, I want to know what changed since the last time it was entered. We'll talk more about that as we get through it. So in this particular example, we're going to be looking at two different accounts. And as I said, at the very beginning, I just very quickly decided to look at the fiscal period table for GP. We might have to actually make that a, you know what, maybe we should do a whole session on that, or maybe with dates a little bit later. But we're going to be looking at the account transaction view, which some of you may be familiar with already. It is the view that Microsoft put into GP that enables us to look at the general ledger detailed information inside of Excel refreshable reports. It is the equivalent to going to Smart List and going to account transactions and adding every single column you could get to. So we know we're going to have some cleanup there. And then we're going to be looking at a view that a lot of people don't even know exists. Because of the name, people think it might be a table, but the view name is CM00500. And you probably have noticed when you're in GP and you're looking at the cash account balance that, let me see if I think I have GP loaded. Nope, I closed it down. Okay, so you know when you're in the card for the checkbook, you could see the balance that BankRec knows it has. That's the only place you could see it. Well, this view will give you that number. So we're going to be looking at that view as well. So these are the two views we're going to look at. And when you're looking at that view, that cash account view, that CM00500, these are the fields that you have. So there's a description column, which is the checkbook ID, the currency ID, whether or not it's active. And it did not clean the names up. You could see active or current balance, CRM user, that's the BankRec user defined field 1. And in the case of inactive, it is set to Boolean. So 0 means it's active, 1 means it's inactive. We have the current balance, the bank account ID if you populate that, the last reconciled balance, and the last date it was balanced. And in that particular one, if you are reconciling today, and today is the 18th of November, and we're reconciling for October 31st, this date, if we put in October 31st as the date we're reconciling through, this would say October 31st, not today's date. And I like looking at both of those numbers as well. You'll find out why in a few moments. So we have the currency ID, and then we have the Dextro index. So these are some of the tables that are in there. So we're going to start by looking at our account transaction table. And give me a second here. So I'm going to have do a cleanup to these particular tables as we go along. So let me go ahead and stop my show, or at least get to this point of view. Actually, before I do that, let me go to the next slide, because I also need to address here the fact that the period balance has zeros in it. So we want to take care of that. If it's 0, if the period ID is 0, we know that's a beginning balance. And in the case of GP, the beginning balance, even though it'll be in the new fiscal year, it's actually going to be dated for the last day of the previous fiscal year. So we know we need to deal with those as we go along. So, okay, got all that done. Let me stop the slideshow for a moment here. And let's go ahead. I've got a blank Power BI, and I'm not connected to anything, pulled up right now. So the first thing I'm going to do is connect to my data in GP. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Get Data. And if this seems a little fast to you, then go back to the very first. This is the third a webinar that DexPro and I have been doing together. So go back to the first one. You get a little bit of a walkthrough about the introduction. So what I'm going to do is choose that I want to get data from a database, and specifically from a SQL server. And I'm going to go ahead and click on Connect. Now, when this comes up, I get this little window. You can see this floating window right here, where I can populate in my server name and my database ID. Now, you'll notice the database ID is optional here, but we do want to go ahead and populate it. And I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And then a list called a navigator list is going to populate up. And I can see all of the views, the tables, and the stored procedures. So you'll notice that if I, like, these are views, they have the little 2 icon there. If I come in and look here, this one has a table icon, which indicates it's a table, and then FX indicates that it's a stored procedure. So we can get access to all of our data, read-only, from the SQL Server here, provided that your credentials give you access to them. Now, one thing that didn't happen, after you key in the name of your server and your database, if you've never logged in before, you'll be prompted for your credentials, and my credentials give me access to everything. So I'm going to look for account transactions, and there it is. As a rule of thumb, most views that Microsoft puts in for us that are user-friendly will have user-friendly names on them, like account transactions. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that checkbox, and I can see a preview of the data there. Looks very similar to what we're used to seeing in SmartList. But I'm also going to go through and get CM00500. There it is. And when I click on there, you could see I get basically that same information that we saw on our screenshot. So I've got both of these options selected. I'm going to come in and click on Transform Data so that it'll open up the query editor and I can begin modeling my data. And I'll start with the bank account number. So, or the bank account balance. So this is my, my checkbook balance, CM00500, and I have what I call Belinda's 3 rules. You'll hear me talk about this every time I present. The first rule is you change the query to something that makes sense, because you want to build out your data modeling for the most technologically improficient person in the company. So it's easy for everybody to consume data and be able to take advantage of the information it provides. So CM00500 isn't going to tell anybody anything. You might not have even known about it before we met today, before we started this webinar. So I'm just going to come over on the right and swipe over that name, and I'm going to call this bank balance. Bank balances, why not? There's bank balances. And then I have the other one is called account transactions. I'm just going to put a space between account and transactions. That is not changing it in the SQL Server, it's only changing it on this report. All right, so I have my bank balances. The second thing I encourage people to do is eliminate columns they do not need. Now this one happens to have 12 columns. If I look in the bottom left, you can see 12 columns, 5 rows of data. Okay, so I have 12 columns. I do not need 12 columns. So what I like to do on the Home tab is I like to click on this choose column icon, and then I can narrow down the columns that I want to keep. Now I want to keep more than I'm getting rid of, so I'm only going to get rid of the ones I do not want. So maybe I don't want currency ID, maybe I don't want active or inactive. I'm going to go ahead and keep it. I'm going to get rid of the bank ID, the user defined fields, the currency, and the Dexter ID. So I just have the checkbook ID, the description, whether or not it's active or inactive, the current balance, and the last reconciliation balance and date. And now I have 6 columns. Makes it much easier to work with. Now, the third thing in Belinda's 3 rules is I like to check the data types to make sure that they make sense for what the column represents. Power BI does a great job at doing some interpretation of it, but I like to go through and double check everything anyhow, because this is going to affect how this particular column of data acts, how it reacts, not how it looks, not how it's formatted as far as the way the date gets formatted, where you maybe want it to be 1/11/11 or November 11 or November 18th, comma, not that kind of formatting, but how it's going to act, that it knows, oh, this is a date field, so I could take advantage of date functionality, or this is a number field, I could take advantage of numerical functionality. So if I were to look at this, let me zoom in again, you could see this checkbook ID is ABC, and that actually is, if I have that column highlighted, I can see right up here on the home panel, the data type is set to text. I could also tell it's text because if I click on that ABC, it is text. And if you want, you could go ahead and just reformat all of them anyhow. That's perfectly fine. So there's checkbook ID, description, inactive is set to a decimal. That's okay, because we're going to make a change there anyhow. Actually, I'll go ahead and do that now. I'm going to click on this and change it to text, and I'll show you why in a few moments. Our current balance is set to decimal. Our last reconciliation balance is set to decimal. And our last reconciliation is set to date time. And I can tell this because, not just because it's there, but because there's a calendar and a clock. And if I click on this, I'm going to change it to date. None of the GP fields use date time. Where time is stored in GP, it's usually a separate field. And if you're accessing any data that does keep them both in the same field, I strongly encourage you to separate them so the date's in one field and the time is in another. You'll notice that you can make it just a date or just a time if you want. So I strongly encourage you to separate those. Okay, now that we have that done, I want to go through and clean up the name. So those are Belinda's 3 rules. So I'm going to change this to checkbook ID. So I just click on it and change the name. I've got this one. I'm just going to call it checkbook. That's actually the description. We have active or inactive, and I'll come back to that one in just a moment. We have our current balance. And then we have our last reconciliation balance. And then our last reconciliation date. Okay. All right, now let's do a little bit of continued modeling. First of all, active or inactive. We want it to actually say active or inactive. So we're going to highlight this column. I'm going to go ahead and choose to right mouse click, and I'm going to choose replace values. And then this window pops up and I'm going to say, if it's a 0, make it active. And now that's why I made it text, because if I'd left it a number, I wouldn't have been able to replace it with a word. Now I need to account for the fact that one of them might be inactive. So if it's a 1, it would need to be inactive. So I could do the right mouse click again, but I just wanted to show you, if you go to transform, you'll have an option right here to do replace value as well. I just like to do right click. And I'm going to change the value from 1 to inactive. And now I've accounted for whether or not it's active or inactive. And all of the steps are being tracked in the applied steps, as we've talked about before. So it's going to be able to recreate itself each and every time. Now, one more thing that I like to do is I like to see how many days it's been since we've last reconciled. And I like to do this because it can give you a faith in the balance. If it's been 6 months since you've reconciled, the level of faith that the current balance is correct for me goes down. So I'm going to highlight the last reconciliation date, and then I'm going to come up to the top and I'm going to choose add column. And because this is a date, and don't worry, I'm not going to do the whole session zoomed in, because this is a date, the date area pops up. Now time is not attached to it, so notice they're dimmed out. So I'm going to choose date and I'm going to tell it to age it. And now I have this new column of age, and this one is a duration. And the duration is set to days, hours, minutes, and seconds. Now I only want days, so I'm going to change the type here to a whole number, and now that is only showing me days. And right now this is negative because I'm looking at Fabricam data that's out in the future. So if I'm looking at days past, if the age is 100 days since reconciled, then that's why, it would say, I would know it was reconciled 100 days ago. But this is out in the future. So I'm going to just change the name of this field from age to days since reconciliation. Okay, so now I have the number of days since reconciliation. One more thing I want to do is I want to also show the amount that is outstanding, the amount of the balance in the current balance that hasn't been cleared by the bank account. And to do this, this is the last one I'm going to do zoomed in. I'm going to choose add column and custom column once again. And then here, I'm going to call this uncleared amount. And I typically don't like to do a lot of custom columns. I try to keep them very simple. There are a small handful that I do, and I've actually got a little bit more than I normally do in this particular scenario, but it's still kind of cool. All right, so I've got custom column here, and I'm going to take the current balance. So I just double click on it, minus, I'm putting spaces just to make it easier to read, the last reconciliation balance. Now you could double click on it or highlight it once and insert. And so it'll give me the difference between these two. So here's uncleared, and I'm going to change this from ABC123, meaning it doesn't know what it is, to a decimal. So now I can see the uncleared balance as well. All right, so I could see we've had uncleared, we have $126,000 more dollars than we last reconciled with at that point in time. Okay, let me unzoom. So this is a little bit about the kind of work that you would want to do. Now, account transactions, there are 121 columns here. There is quite a bit we'd want to do. I'm not going to do it all now because I want to get to the visuals as well, but we can come back to this a little bit more if we have time at the end. I've got one worked up for us already. But a couple of things to note. I'm going to come in and go ahead and change it, go to home and choose columns again. And I'm going to unselect because I want to get rid of far more than I want to keep. And I'll keep journal entry, I'll keep the series, I'll keep the transaction date, the account number. I like to get the account description from the account master. That way, if the account description changed, I won't have two different account descriptions for the same account number. So I'll get it from here. And then I want to get, let's see, what else am I going to get? Debit and credit amount. There we go. Debit amount, credit amount, account category number. so I could know which ones are cash. And then I'm going to get a few more like description. And in the handouts, you could see I've got these highlighted. I'm also going to come in and get the, I want to get the history year and the open year. And then I'm going to get the master ID, the master name, the originating posted date. That's the date you actually posted something, regardless of when it went in the general ledger. I'm going to get the period date because we need that to be able to see if it's a beginning balance or not, the reference. You also could get the transaction source if you want, the user who posted it, just in case. And you need to always account when you're looking at transactions for voided transactions. So I've narrowed it down to 19 columns. And some of the cleanups that I would do, for example, first let's start with voids. I don't need to worry about normal. I know these all came in okay. I'm not going to worry about that right now, but normally you do Belinda's 3 rules, set the data type. I'll monitor those as I go along. I also like to change the name, but I'm going to just kind of skipped along ahead for time. So we're going to start with voided. And just like in Excel, I could filter right here, but I don't see any voided transactions yet. In the case of general ledger, you could have a transaction entered in, not posted. And if you turn off the ability to delete unposted transactions, someone has to void it. So you might have voids in history. So better safe than sorry, go ahead and clear it out here. Since I don't see yeses, I only see the first 1,000 records in here. I'm going to instead select text filters and I will say equals. And then this window pops up and then I could select no from the drop down list. And this will exclude all of my voided transactions. And now what I could do is right mouse click and remove that column. All right, so that makes it nice and easy. Ooh, I did not mean transaction source. So let me go back. This is why I like using the window for choosing the columns. I did not want transaction source. I wanted source documents. So let me come back. Okay. Now, oh, I just clicked on that gear to get that window back up, by the way. Okay, and then now I come back to the bottom so I can keep adding to my list. All right, so got that covered. A couple other things that I like to do is history year and open year. If I'm going to be using this as my fiscal year, right now they're set to 2 different data types. I'm going to set the history year to text, so they're both text. And now what I'm going to do, highlight both columns. I want to get rid of anywhere you see a null, because if it's not been closed yet, it's going to have an open year number and null in history. And if it has been closed, there'll be a year in the history, but not the open year. So I'm going to right mouse click and choose to replace values. So anywhere I see a null, I'm just going to have it put nothing there. So I'm not going to type anything into the replace, and I'll click OK. And then now what I can do, you can see the nulls are gone. So I'm going to right mouse click and choose to merge columns with no separator. And I'll call this the fiscal year. And now I just have 1 column for fiscal years. Now I'm down to 17 columns. A couple other things I like to do. I'm not going to do all of them now, but I do like, I'm going to take the master ID and the master name and make those one single field. So I'm going to highlight both of those. Right mouse click and choose merge columns. Now the order I select them, so I clicked on master ID, held my control key down, and they got master name. That's the order in which they'll appear. And in this particular case, I'm going to choose a custom separator. I'll do a space, dash space, and I'm going to call this, let's just call it master record. Now I have 16 columns because I have merged both of those together. So I could see the vendor ID, customer ID, employee ID with the employee record as we go along. Then I would want to do the same thing for description and reference. I've got reference. I'm going to hold the control key down and do description. In this particular view, what is in the reference becomes the transaction, the general ledger reference line, and the description becomes the distribution reference. I know that's backwards sounding, but that's the way it rolls. So I'm going to hold the reference first, hold the control key, do description, and then I'm going to merge these columns. And we'll call this one, we'll just call it JE reference. Okay, cool. So we got the JE reference. Now I'm going to get rid of the source document and, oh, nope, I merged those, so that's cool. All right, so why did I get the series? Because maybe I don't want to have the payroll information show up with that master information. We don't want to see the detail. We want it to be able to do something generic. So what I'm going to do is come up to add columns, and I'm going to choose conditional column. So now I could come in and say, I'm just going to call this source. I can have it say, all right, if I am the series, if it does not begin with PAY for payroll, or you could type the whole thing in. I want the output to be, I clicked on the ABC 1, 2, 3. I'm going to choose select a column, and I'm going to get the master record information. But if it is payroll, then I want it to say payroll transaction. And then now I'm going to click OK. So now I have this source option here that will either say payroll transaction or have that information. I'm going to set this to text. Now I no longer need the master record, nor do I need the series any longer. So I'm going to just select those and choose remove column. Now I'm down to 14. So you can see how you can keep cleaning up data like this. The last thing I want to do is about the fiscal period. I want to deal with the beginning balance, period 0. That's something we have to contend with. Because if it's period 0, and this should be just date like this, if it's period 0, then it's going to be dated the last day of the previous year. The fiscal year will be right, but the date's not going to be right. And if I do a slicer by date, that I don't want the beginning balance for the new year to be lumped in with the previous year's dates, because it's just simply dated that way. So what I'm going to do is come over to the transaction date, and I'm going to create, let me first of all set this just to date. I'm going to create a balance brought forward date where I'm going to have a whole nother column where I take this date and I add 1 to it. And then I'm going to go through and say, if it's period 0, get the balance brought forward date, which is the transaction date plus 1 day. Otherwise, get the transaction date. I hope that makes sense to you. So I've got the transaction date highlighted. I'm going to come up to add column, and I'm going to do custom column again. And normally I say only do custom columns for easy math and text, but I have an example of here's an example of where I break that rule a little bit. So I'm just going to call this BBF date. And then in the list here, if you start typing it in, so I'm going to do look for date. There is add date, and I'm going to select it. It is case sensitive, so you have to be very careful about that. So I always select from the list. And then I'm going to put a starting parenthesis to tell it what I want to add, and then IntelliSense will kick in. So now it's saying get the date, and I want to take the transaction date, and then I'll do a comma, and then IntelliSense is saying give me the number of days, and I just want to add 1 day. And so I'll put an ending parenthesis, and then I'm going to click OK. And then now at the very end, I have the balance brought forward date. And let me make this a date field. So if you can see, the first row is dated 2/3/2026, and the transaction date is 2/2/2026. Let me just move this to the very end, make it a little easier to see. Okay. So I have balance brought forward and transaction date. And so now what I want to do for my fiscal period, under add column, I'm going to do another conditional column. And this time we'll just call this transaction date. And I'm going to come in and say, all right, if the period ID is equal to 0, then I want to get the date from the balance brought forward date, BBF date. Otherwise, I want to get it from the transaction date. And now I'm going to click OK. And you could see in this case, I got it from the transaction date, that particular one. Let me set that to date. But that's how we could get the date to move forward one day for this balance brought forwards. I'm going to highlight the BBF date and the transaction date, and I'm going to remove those. Now I'm down to 14 columns. So anywhere that I have a period ID of 0, which I'm not sure I have any. Yeah, there's one. If I look at period ID 0, this date, I should have pulled it up. Well, actually, these are unposted, but it'll move it up accordingly. So they'll be dated in the future date. So all of these steps got recorded for us as we went along. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on Home and Close and Apply. And this is basically everything that we need to do as far as data modeling. In the version I'm giving you, I will connect also to the fiscal period, so that'll make life a little bit easier. But we have two different queries here, count transactions and balance. If I click on the relationship mode or the model mode, we are not going to connect these to each other, but we're going to be using data together. All right, so as I start out here, and let me just format the background with a little bit of color so it stands out a little better. And then let me duplicate. Okay, we're going to start building out some reports. So let's start with how we would get the general ledger information. So let me going through the slides a little bit. All right. The first thing we'd want to do is get our bank balances. So I'm going to come and get the card visual, and this is the 1, 2, 3 visual, and I'm just going to select it right here. If I open up the bank balance transaction here, and let me stretch this out a little bit, I'm going to take that current balance and drag it into the fields, and this is going to give me my bank balance. And in Fabricam, the payroll bank account's way negative. Now it is summarizing, so I'm going to want to, with my handlebar still around it, come over to the format icon, and I'm going to choose data label, and I'm going to change the display units from auto to none. So this is my bank balance. That's how simple that is for all of my cash accounts. This is what you would see if you looked at the card, and this is as of everything that's out there, even future dated things. So I'm going to copy this and just paste this over. And now I have another version of it. This time though, I've got it highlighted. I'm going to come over and select the multi-row card visual, which is right next to it. And in this one, I have an opportunity to add more fields to it. So I can see the current balance here. Actually, let me do it like this. What I'm going to do is add in the checkbook ID. So once I do that, I can see the checkbook ID and the current balance. And then I'm going to keep going forward here. And I'm going to say, all right, also give me the uncleared amount. So I could see the uncleared amount. I could even see the days since it was last reconciled. So now I have 3 different fields of data. And if you want to format these so that they have commas in them, that's the days since reconciled. I'm just going to click on it over here in the fields on the right, and the column tools area will appear if you're on a newer version of Power BI Desktop. And if not, go back to the very first webinar that we did in this series, and you can see about how to get that. I'm just going to click on the comma, and now it has a comma there. It's formatted as a comma. So on this screen, this is where I do formatting on how it will appear. If I want the uncleared balance to be numerical or be currency related, I'm going to click on the currency icon, and it sets to auto for the decimal places, but I'm going to hard code this as 2. And then I'll do the same thing for the current balance. I'm going to click on the dollar value and hard code this to 2. So now you could see I have all of my balances set up. And this is giving me the balance information from the bank rec module. So now as I keep moving on, I'm now on page 2. And on page 2, I want to do something a little bit different. On this one, I want to talk about the cash balance itself. Now, normally, I do not like to see the, let's see, I want to make sure I got this set the way I wanted. Yeah, okay. So I want to look at the changes, not the cash balance. I want to see how my cash is changing over time. Basically, I want to see the net for every single day. Now, normally I'm not a big fan of the line chart, but if you're looking at something over an extended period of time, big fan. Okay, so I'm adding in the line chart, and there's an axis, a legend, and a value for me to populate. So this time I'm going to go look at the general ledger information. And one of the reasons I had you keep the source document is you could tell where something came from. So that's one way you can help make sure that numbers stay in balance. Definitely you want to turn off the general ledger so you can't code anything to bank accounts directly. You want it to come from the subsidiary module, bank reconciliation, payables, receivables, or payroll. So that'll help keep things in balance. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to bring in the debit amount or the net amount of the bank accounts. Now, to do this, the first thing I want to do is I want this page to be set to only look at cash accounts and cash equivalent accounts. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to choose the category, the account category. I should have changed that to account category instead of account category number. And I'm going to put in a filter for this particular page. So I've got a filter here, and I'm going to say, all right, just show me cash accounts or whatever you call it. This is the category inside of GP. If you want, you could also put in specific account numbers of how you want to see it. That's perfectly fine too. You don't have to use account category. So now whatever I populate on the screen is only going to be that. Now, what I want to do is, first of all, I'm going to go through and get the date. So I'm going to use that transaction date, and I'm going to put that in the axis. So that'll run along the bottom. For the values, I want to get the debit amount minus the credit amount. Now, I could create a whole new column for that, or I could simply create a DAX function. And so to do that, I'm going to just click on the ellipsis right here and add a new measure. I'm basically just creating a formula. I'm not adding any more data to it, and the formula will be debits minus credits. And I'm going to call this, we'll call it net debit. That's one of the terms I like to use because I also like to have net credit. And when you create just the formula, you have to tell it how to aggregate for every line. So I'm just basically going to do like a sum X. And the sum X means for every single row, I want you to give me the sum. And first I have to put in the table. There's the account transaction table. And I'm going to say, give me the debit amount. There it is. Minus the credit amount, and then ending parentheses. So in this account transaction table, I'm going to take the debit amount minus the credit amount, and for every single row, so I'll click on that check, and then now I could take that value and drop it in my values. Now this is what my cash is doing, but I have beginning balances in here, so I want to get rid of those. So I'm also going to come into period ID, put a filter on this page, and I'm going to say when the advanced filtering I'll do is not 0. And when you do advanced filtering, you have to do an apply. So now I've got rid of my beginning balances. So this is the net change of my cash for every single day. And I could narrow it down and put a slicer in for a year, but I could get a feel for what's going on with my cash. Here's a big drop. If I just hover over it, I can see that happen on April 20th, 2027, but I could get just a feel for everything in my transactions. Now, if you go to the account transactions, you might also want to include whether or not something's posted, because you could look at this with just unposted transactions as well. So, or just posted transactions, or even see what it looks like if everything gets posted at the same time, or it gets posted that is out there right now in the general ledger. So we're not limited to just things that are posted, but that's another slicer we could put in, or something we could put in a filter for the entire page. But this is pretty cool. Now, the fact that we have this line of, we can come in and click on this analytics icon, and we can add some other things to it. We could add a trend line to it if we want to. So I'm simply going to click on add, and I now have a trend line. I can see it's slightly going down on my trend line. I could also come in and put in a forecast. So I could say, all right, give me a forecast. And I'm just going to leave the defaults here to give me 10 points out. And I'm going to go ahead and thank you. Someone brought me an iced tea. Thank you very much. Oh, and a smoothie. Cool. All right. So once I have those added in, let's see. I've got the last 10 points. I'm not going to be able to format this right now. We'll deal with that in a bit, but you could put some forecast on there as well. But I could see the trend, our cash is slowly going down a bit. And you might want to take out, you notice in the forecast, you could take out like some of these extreme high points and end points so that you could do a little bit of forecasting. All right, let me delete that page. And I'm going to come in and duplicate this page. We'll call this page 3, big fancy names. And I'm going to get rid of this visual, but I'm going to keep my account categories for cash and for period IDs. I'm cheating and looking at what I want the pictures to look like. So we evaluated our cash balance from being correct. We looked at our cash changes over a period of time. Now what I'd like to do is actually put in a calendar so I could see the cash. So this time I'm going to come in and click on this ellipsis over here for the visualizations so I could get more visuals, and I'm going to choose get more visuals. And this is going to open up App Source, a Microsoft market for apps for the Power Platform piece, and hopefully it'll pop up in a minute. Come on. Should have saved my work, huh? Well, meanwhile, while that's pulling up, let me go back to a couple slides I have here. Okay, so we saw our hero 0. Okay, and through there. Also, the one I'm giving you, I've created some parameters. I left those in from a previous one. You could add in a DAX table if you want, but here are like the cash and cash equivalents. And on this one, I did have my trend line in, and I also have my forecast out. I just didn't have it set right so that I could see a forecast. In this particular case, I did something, I could see the forecast and the actual, and you can see the actual is definitely in the forecast. When it comes to forecasting, you can only do it on a line chart. If you're going to do it trend, you could also do it on an area chart, a cluster column chart, or a line and custom column chart. So the line basically has to have that line relevance in there. The handout does have a link to docs for a little bit more information. And this is what we're going to build out now, the custom calendar. So let me stop my slide. And now we have AppSource pulled up. You can see here's AppSource. So I want a calendar. So what I'm going to do is just come in and type in calendar. And if you spell it right, you should get a calendar. Oh, let's see. Let's go to all. Okay. This is the one I want, Beyond Soft. I do have it listed in the system. So I'm going to simply click on add. And now one of the things I love about the newer versions is it puts all the custom visuals right in here. So I'm going to click on this and drag it down. And in this particular scenario, what I'm going to do, I've got date fields and then measure. So on my date field, I'm going to come in and put in the, I'm going to actually get the actual date. So let me get the transaction date. And then for the measure data, I'm going to get that net debit balance. Okay, so for each day, basically, I'm getting the net change. And what I'm going to do is come in and do a little bit of format because it's a little hard to read. So I'm going to start with text. And let me make this like 14. I'll make it a little easier to see. 14. And okay, now I can see the balance a little bit better. And one other thing that I want to do here is I want to change the data colors. So I'm going to open up the data colors and I'm going to change the, on the gradient here, I'm going to change it by adding divergent. Now I can add in 3 colors. So the lower numbers, the lower colors, I'm going to make light red. The maximum colors, I'm going to find some variation of green. And then the center colors, I'll make light yellow. There we go. So now, if it is one of the negative, you could see if I would want to also put the periods in the slicer for the periods and the years, but I could come through and easily see then which dates the transactions, the cashes are going up and the cash is coming down. Another cool way of looking at data as we go along is something I call changes to balances. And in this one, I'm just going to add a clustered bar chart here. And I want to get rid of the account category being cash. So I'm going to just clear that filter. So I've got this filter set up here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, for this first one, I'm going to create something. I just want cash transactions for this one. So I'm going to put the account category number in the filters for this visual. And I'm going to say, all right, this one is cash. And I'll show you the end results in a few moments. So I'm only looking at cash in this particular visual. And so for the values, I'm going to put in net debit because the cash accounts have a debit amount. So whoops, net debit. And then I'm going to put in like the period in the legend. And actually, let me move that to the axis. Okay, so I can see all the different periods listed right here. If I were to zoom in, I could see them a little bit better. So here are all the periods, and I would probably want to clean this up a little bit. So I maybe just want to have a quarter. So let me come to, I'm just going to say let's do 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so here is the change of my cash accounts for periods 4, 5, and 6. And if I copy this over, I could do the same thing, leaving it exactly as is, but instead of cash accounts, I want to get accounts receivable. And then I could do the same thing for sales, but put in net change as being credits minus debits. So if it's credits, it'll be positive. And the ending result, you know, at some point, I'm going to come in and end up looking just like this. The ending result is going to look like this. So you can see the changes in the cash by month compared to the AR, compared to the sales, and so forth. Now, what makes this really cool, and you could just manually set it to quarter, or in this case, pick like a rolling 3 months. I could see, all right, in this one, my cash is, if I start in April, and I should rearrange these, I could basically see what my cash is doing over a given 3-month period. If it's going down, is my AR also going down? If my AR is staying the same, then that means if the AR is staying the same, then what does my sales look like? And I could see the relation of the data here, and the same with AP and inventory changes in net profit, so I could do some comparison. So if my cash is going down, but my AR is staying the same and my sales are staying pretty even, then that must be, I'm spending more in, I'm paying out more in my AP. And in this case, that's definitely the case. And if I look at the numbers compared to the two, you might even want to put values on them. How does that compare to my cost of goods sold and my inventory? Now, I combine those together. This would be a distribution one. I combine those together because it's possible you could buy inventory and sell it in the same month. So I'm combining inventory changes and cost of goods changes together at the same time. So I'm looking just graphically at the picture. My cash is telling me compared to changes in my AR and my AP compared to sales and what I'm spending for inventory or just net profit as a whole. And it kind of gives me an idea of where I need to focus. So if my cash is going down and AR is staying about the same and sales is staying about the same, then obviously the problem is expenditure. So I need to think about that as I go along. And because of the time, I'm going to skip to the next one. But another way that I like to look at data, and this is something that I built in my own company many, many years ago, and I didn't have the cool ways of doing it with DAX, or with Power BI, is looking at the actual date something gets posted. So I'm looking at like the last 30 days, because I know in our organization, I was constantly asked, where does the money go? Where does the money go? Where does the money go? And if you look at this, and instead of doing it by bank account here, I would definitely change it to like looking at master records, but you could see where the money goes by vendor or by customer, where it's coming in, where it's going out. And these look a bit backwards. I'm not really sure what the deal is, but Fabricam's weird, but I can see what is going on with the data. So I know my husband, who I worked with for many years, he would always say, where does the money go? I know money's coming in. So this is a way we can do that. So let's see if we can make this happen really quickly. So I'm going to duplicate again right here and get rid of this visual. And then let's do an inflow one. So again, I'm going to create a bar chart. I like the way those display information. So I'm going to do the outflows. Where does the money coming out from? So in this particular case, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I want it to only be my cash accounts. So on the values though, I'm going to grab, if it's money going out, I'm going to grab all my credits. So these are all my credit balances. And I'm going to put in the access. I'm going to come in and add that source in. So I could see like the vendor number, or if usually it's vendor or payroll transaction in this particular case, I could see where the money's going to. For right now, this is everything. If I want it to be for a very specific time period, what I need to do is make that happen. So one of the things I could do, and to make this easy, is I could take that originating posted date and drop it into filters for this page. And I could say, all right, I want to see, not the basic filtering, but I want to do a relative date. And I could say, show me the last. Now I'm going to have to go more than 30 days because it's Fabricam data. So let me do the last 3,000 days. Okay, still not enough. Let's see if I could do in the next relative date is in the next 3,000 days. Okay, that's too many. 1,000 days, 1,500 days, closer, 1,800 days. I've got some with blanks there. I'm not sure what those are about. 2,100 days. I think you get the point though. Okay, so normally you'd say like in the past 30 days. All right, that's close enough. So these are all my credit ones. So if I take this and copy this, then what I might want to do is see my inflows as well. So I'm going to change the one on the left to be not credit balances, but just the debit balances. So this is inflow. So one of the things I might want to do is change the colors to be green for cash, perhaps. And that's an ugly green, but we're going to pretend it works. And this one will make red. Okay, so this is cash coming in, this is cash going out, and I can literally see who it's to and how much was paid out or paid in, or this is how much we got. So we got more money in this time period from Plaza One than anybody else. And we spent more money with Convex. And so this is a really cool way to look at your cash. And if you look at it by the relative date, by the actual posting date, you could see how it changed since the last time you looked at it. So that brings me to the end. If there are any questions, I do have this link here and where you can get I'm making one that looks at fiscal periods. It's looking at the fiscal calendar in GP that has all these reports built out that are a template that you could use for free against your own data if you want to get that. And if you want to tell me what it is you'd like to see in an upcoming session. So are there any questions, Marlena or Haley?
Any questions, anyone from the session, either via voice or chat?
That's a lot of information fast, I know, but it's a great way to look at your data. So
we're gonna do one slide at the end, if possible, really quick, and then yeah, we just need to.
What was that?
We want to share one slide at the end.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I just want to touch base. There you go.
Let me put this link also in the chat, and then by all means, feel free to share.
Right. So we just want to make sure that everyone catches this, and we're going to share it also in our chat. Upcoming, the class Belinda just mentioned, December 14th at 2 p.m. We will continue learning from Belinda about Power BI. The link will be available for that soon on our website. And on December 15th, just day after, is our first page training, 4 hour long with Amber Bell. And that training will include her year-end closing workbook, as well as it will cover 1099 changes in IRS changes that do affect all GP users. So that will be a pretty important training coming up, and we're going to share the link with that. And I also wanted to say that Dexpro offers high-level system review, evaluation, sort of second opinion to your system. And we do it at no charge, and feel free to contact me directly. The gain from it is we will point out to you what you own and not using today.
Wow, that is the deal of the century. Because people only use a small portion, and sometimes there's, you know, what you could I can't tell you how many times I've gone in and spent just an hour or two with somebody and they end up saving a lot of time, which saves a lot of money. So you might be able to start saving money right away with just you know, a little bit of support time from you guys, and you never know it till you get a chance to go in. So that's the deal of the century. You guys should take advantage of that. And I have to give Amber a plug. If you guys have never been treated by a session with Amber, then you're missing out on something really grand. So, yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time today. Hopefully this will give you something that will help you manage your cash a little bit better. And I think we're going to need it through we got unfortunately a little more ways to go through this pandemic. So everyone needs to conserve every dollar they possibly can. So, and don't forget, in the chat, there is that link. And so those people who fill out the link within the next day will automatically get this template. So they don't even have to rebuild everything, but you certainly can by going back and watching this recorded session.
Great session, Belinda. Always a pleasure, and thank you so much.
My pleasure.